Okay, folks. It's Alistair McConnachie here from A Force for Good, just waiting for people to come in. And we are in Edinburgh beside the mighty Dundas monument, which is right behind me. And that's a good shot, isn't it? That's on Facebook and that's also on Twitter. And I hope you're hearing me fine. If you can hear me fine, please do mention, please do say that you can hear me fine. Okay, good. So it's a nice day here in Edinburgh, and as per you can guess, A Force for Good has been at the forefront of defending the Dundas statue. We were here on back in June when we had 40 of our supporters. We were standing up against the SNP and the BLM people who want to befoul the statue with a false plaque, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to do something. We're going to do a stunt, so keep watching, because we want to put the anti-British history in the bin. Now, here's the deal. Who is that man that's at the top of that statue? Well, his name is Henry Dundas, and he was one of Scotland's greatest sons. He was a proponent of the Union. He was the Lord Advocate of Scotland, which is to say he was a chief law officer. He was the First Lord of the British Admiralty, and in that capacity he built up the Royal Navy so that in 1805 we won the Battle of Trafalgar. He was a proponent of the Gaelic language. He supported returning lands that had been forfeited by the Jacobites back to the Jacobite families. He removed the status of serfs from the Scottish mining class, and he was also a proponent, unusual at the time, of giving the vote to Irish Catholics. So in his time he could also be said to be quite a progressive fellow. And of course, it has been said that nobody did more than Dundas to promote the interests of Scots in the British Empire. Also in 1778, as the chief law officer in Scotland, he won the famous case of Joseph Knight, which established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. So why do the SNP and the Black Lives Matter people hate him so much? Why are they misrepresenting such a great man? Well, we're standing up for his honour, and we're standing up especially for historical truth, because that's the important thing that we must do. We must stand for historical truth against the lies of not just the SNP but also the Black Lives movement. Now, why is the SNP getting involved in this? Well, obviously the BLM movement is itself a race supremacist organisation. They want to reduce British history to nothing more than a story of racism. They only want to see They only want to frame British history through the strange lens of racism. Everything is, apparently, according to them, racist. Well, why would they do that? Well, it's because they're revolutionaries and they want to befoul the past in order that we feel awkward about the present, in order that we don't wish to defend the present. And in that sense, it fits in very nicely with the SNP's agenda, which of course is to destroy the Union. So if you can befoul the name of great Scotsmen in the past, who, such as Dundas, happened to be Unionists, then of course you can make people feel awkward about the Union today. So the SNP and the BLM come together in that sort of attitude. So they can find common cause, and it's left to Unionists such as ourselves to defend the integrity and the memory of Scottish heroes of the past, who are also, of course, great British heroes. So we're standing up for that today, and in a minute I'm going to take you over to the plaque that they're going to put up, and we're going to get it in the bin, as they say. So keep watching this. It's going to be fun. Now, other things that I want to say about Dundas is, if it hadn't been for him building up the Royal Navy, we would not have won the Battle of Trafalgar, and in 1807 we would not have been able to set up the law which prevented trading of slaves throughout the British Empire. Not only that with Dundas, but why do they hate him? Yeah, get back to why they are hating on this poor chap. Well, in 1792, the Prime Minister was William Pitt the Younger, and he wanted to abolish slavery. Now, of course, there was a lot of landed and vested and moneyed interests who wanted to maintain the system, and Dundas knew that it would be a very difficult thing to get a law through Parliament to abolish slavery, but nevertheless he tried. And what he said was that the process would be, quote-unquote, gradual. And you know what? That was enough. That was enough for the law to pass in 1792. It passed through the Commons, okay? But as anybody who knows about British parliamentary constitutionalism knows, that it also has to get through the Lords. Well, when it got to the Lords, back in those days, there was a lot of moneyed interests who simply still did not want to pass that law. And so it failed at the Lords. But that was nothing to do with poor old Henry Dundas, whose diplomacy had managed to get it halfway through Parliament. So here's the terrible thing that they say about Dundas, is they say that because he introduced the word gradual, what that meant is that he was delaying the abolition of slavery. Well, you could just as easily say that he was speeding it up. He was helping to move it forward a pace, so that in 15 years later, in 1807, the British Parliament and the moneyed interests were in fact ready to at least abolish the trade in slaves in the British Empire, and that law was passed in 1807. So Dundas moved that forward a notch, and he helped actually to abolish it. So it's an absolute travesty to say that in some way he delayed it. No, he did his best at the time to get the bill through. So good for him, and we acknowledge that element. But the BLM people and the SNP people don't want to listen to that, because they just don't want to understand historical truth. Well, we at A Force for Good are all about finding the truth of the matter, and this is the truth of the matter that we have articulated and that we're going to continue to articulate. Now, there is a big issue here in Edinburgh, because the SNP administration have put together a task force composed of the usual suspects who are going to look at all of Edinburgh's statues and street names and so on, and see in what way they can befoul all of that. Well, I've got news for them. Everything about Edinburgh is going to be related in some way to the Union or the British Empire or to our great Scottish history in some way. Do you know, we're standing here in what's called the New Town. Now, the New Town was designed by James Craig. Now, do you know what James Craig's original design for the New Town was? It was to design it in the shape of a Union Jack, okay? To design it in the shape of a Union Jack. Now, when that got to that was at the planning stage. When that actually got, though, to the reality, he realised that it would be a little bit more difficult. So he decided just to simply design it in a grid manner. But my point there is to say that everything about Edinburgh is in some way related to Britain and the Union and the greatness of Britain and its history, okay? So we are going to have to stand up for it, and we're going to have to stand strong for it. And next year, there's going to be a lot more of this craziness going on, and A Force for Good is going to be at the forefront of that. So please, if you can help us, we've got a crowdfunder running, the link is there. Please do help us with that, because we're going to need your help in order to stand strong for Britain here in Scotland, and to stand strong for our Scottish heroes such as Dundas, okay? Standing strong for him. Who else is going to do it? Who else is going to put themselves out there? We at A Force for Good have the ability, the will, the energy, the mind. You know, we just need your help. So if you can donate to that crowdfunder, please do so. Now, I'm going to walk over to the plaque, and I'm going to talk about the plaque while I actually simply read it. Now, I'll probably be able to just do this with both of these cameras. I have to shift the camera from one hand to another. Please bear with me. I'm just going to give a camera to if you just hold that on me while I change this. Okay, we're going to just move over here to this, and we're going to just take a picture of it. So here they're talking about a new plaque has been commissioned for the Melville Monument to explain Henry Dundas, his impact on society, and to acknowledge his role in delaying the abolition of the slave trade. Well, straight away, that's something that is not appropriate, because as we've just said to you, he did not delay the abolition of the slave trade. In fact, he moved it forward. He moved it forward by finding a way to persuade the moneyed interests that it would be gradual. Now, there's one or two other things that we want to talk about on this plaque. It says, at the top of this neoclassical column stands a statue of Henry Dundas. He was the Scottish Lord Advocate, an MP for Edinburgh and Midlothian, and the First Lord of the Admiralty. Dundas was a contentious figure. Well, he certainly was, provoking controversies that resonate to this day. That's true. Now, this is where it gets wrong. While Home Secretary in 1792, that's what I was talking about, the gradual addition that managed to get it through the Commons. And First Secretary of State for War, he was instrumental in deferring the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. No, he was not instrumental in deferring it at all. That's just a simple lie. Slave trading by British ships was not abolished until 1807. That's correct. It was abolished at the time that Parliament was ready to abolish it. As a result of this delay, more than 500,000 enslaved Africans crossed the Atlantic. Well, that's absolute nonsense. As a result of this delay, to try to say that this man was responsible for 500,000, if that is indeed a correct figure, which is certainly debatable, crossing the Atlantic, to try to blame that on him is absolutely, totally ahistorical nonsense. It also says that Dundas also curbed democratic dissent in Scotland. Well, that's only to the extent that this was the period of the French Revolution, and there was a small handful, just a small handful of radicals, mainly based around Dundee, who were suspected of sympathising with the French, and they were seen in that regard as being traitorous indeed to Scotland and to the rest of the United Kingdom. So it was only in that sense that you could say that he was spying. He had his men spying on those that he thought were sympathetic to the French Revolution. That's a perfectly normal thing for somebody in his position to be doing at that time. Nothing particularly surprising about that. And then it goes on and says that he defended and expanded the British Empire. Well, that's certainly true, and that's something that we're very proud of him for having done. Imposing colonial rule on indigenous peoples. Well, that's one way of putting it, I suppose. And this is what's irritating. He was impeached in the United Kingdom for misappropriation of public money, and although acquitted, he never held public office again. Well, yeah, I mean, this memorial was not erected to the first man that was impeached in the United Kingdom. You know, why bring up that? Now, the point about that as well is that he was acquitted on every single charge by a huge majority of his peers. Okay, so clearly somebody simply had it in for him in Parliament, probably because he was a loud, brash, outspoken, forward-moving Scotsman that maybe some people got a little bit irritated by. That was the only reason, but he was totally cleared by his colleagues. Good for him. Good for him. So there's no need to bring up that sort of part of his history as if it's somehow acts against him. He was totally cleared of that. And then it goes on to say, finally, despite this, now notice the lines, despite this, the monument before you was funded by voluntary contributions from British naval officers, petty officers, seamen and marines, and was erected in 1821 with the statue placed on top in 1827. And then it says, in 2020, this plaque was dedicated to the memory of more than 500,000 Africans whose enslavement was a consequence of Henry Dundas's actions. Well, that's what is really wrong and irritating about that. Okay? He was very clear, and he's on record as saying that he was against slavery. And he wanted it to be abolished. He was not a slave owner. He was not a slave trader. He did his best at the time to try to move forward the abolition of what was one of the main ways that the economy back then was working, especially in the Caribbean states. So he did his best to abolish slavery at the time, and that's what he should be remembered for. His memory should not be befouled in this way by ahistorical nonsense. Okay, now we're running a crowdfunder. If you can help us, please do. What I'm going to do now is we're going to get this in the bin. Okay, so I've got a black bin liner, and we're going to cover this with a black bin liner because that's where it belongs. This nonsense belongs covered over. So I'm going to give this to my friend, and he's going to fix on this, and we'll be broadcasting for another 2 or 3 minutes, and please do support our work. Okay, so we're going to get this false history in the bin. Okay folks, that's that false history in the bin. Okay, and we need to do more of this sort of stuff because we must not stand We must not stand for this sort of attitude that is trying to beshit our history in these ways, okay? Because the people who are promoting stuff like this, they don't know and they don't care. But we care, okay? A Force for Good cares. That's why we're doing our thing. So please, if you can stand with us, do so. If you can give money, which is what most people can do, please click on that crowdfunder link, because we need your support and we're going to need it in 2021. It's going to be a very important year, and this sort of nonsense is going to ramp up, and we have to be ready to fight it. And this is one way that we do it. So folks, I'm going to take the camera back from my colleague. I'm going to switch off now. And just one other thing that we want to see, and we mentioned this when we campaigned in June, is that we want to see a statue to the men of the Royal Navy who died enforcing the ban on slavery. The men of the West African Squadron who died enforcing the ban on slavery in the 19th century. Folks, I'm taking these back. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching.